All right, Paul,
All right.
the floor is
Thank you so
yours.
much. Thank you so much, Stacy. And just a quick reminder before we get started, everyone, make sure you mute your Zooms. Getting a little bit of feedback there, I think, from a few. All right. Thanks, everyone. And let me get through the technically most challenging part of the night here and pull up my presentation for y'all. I've got some photos to share. Let's see, and we'll do. Oops. Okay, and play. And is that looking good, Stacy?
Yep, it's looking great.
All right, cool. Let me make this a little bigger on my end and I will get started. Um, all right. Well, thank you for all, first of all, for coming out tonight. This is kind of a fun thing to talk about. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. So thank you all for letting me talk about it. As Stacy said, should have some time for questions at the end. But if there's a really pressing question and on something I say and you really want to jump in, feel free to either raise your hand in the comments or jump in. It's also, like Stacy said, a great idea. Just put some questions in the chat as you think about them, and I'll try to get to them at the end. So let's talk about bow hunting for mountain goats. So I think we'll address a lot of different aspects of it, and I'm sure there'll be some things I don't that people want to hear about potentially. But let's get started. First, I'll tell you about myself. I pretty much have lived my whole life in South Central Alaska, and my childhood home and my current home, although they're about 50 miles apart, are both kind of right in the Chugach Mountains of Alaska, which some people are probably familiar with. It's a place that holds both mountain goats and sheep, Dall sheep, that is. And so I've pretty much been around those animals my whole life. Started hunting, got an opportunity to hunt sheep a little bit when I was younger. I've always been a bow hunter and always specifically been a traditional bow hunter, meaning I've hunted with long bows and recurves. And mostly all just kind of solo hunts, but I'll talk about that a little more later. Um, but in 2012, I started working in Kodiak as a physician. I had recently finished my training and I had a schedule that I was working in the ER a lot, and I was able to break free for some long weekends. And Kodiak has some awesome kind of over-the-counter registration goat opportunities, and I got completely hooked on it and I have been pretty obsessed ever since. Uh, since then, since that kind of 2012, 2013 era, I've made time every year to hunt sheep or goats exclusively with longbows and recurves, and pretty much always by myself. Just these kind of the sheep hunts, especially, end up being, 2 to 3 weeks sometimes out there by myself. Goat hunts have typically been a little shorter, um, but I just really enjoy that time. I don't really know why, but for the last 5 or 6 years, I've really focused on sheep hunting and not haven't really been goat hunting as much. Um, I think part of it's just I love the country the sheep are in, but the goats are still my favorite animals in the landscape. I just think they're the coolest animals out there, honestly, and I just love seeing them. And I'm fortunate that in both my day to day and in my winter, I kind of take a little break from doctor work every winter to guide backcountry skiing, and I very frequently see goats when I'm doing that. And so I just love being around them, especially in the winter. It's just so cool to see them out there. So despite the recent passion for sheep, goats are my favorite. But I have really enjoyed chasing down some old rams. That is my first Billy with a bow. That was like November 23rd of 2013. Looking at that picture, I feel like my face makes it look like a lot longer ago. I feel like I was a lot younger then. But realizing how much I've aged. But that was a pretty cool hunt, and it really got me hooked on goat hunting. That was goat, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. But that goat was taken at about 8 yards with a longbow, with crampons on my feet and an ice axe in my hand as I got to it, and it was just a super cool experience. So why bother? Why hunt goats with a bow? Most places, and even here in Alaska, almost all the seasons and areas are open for rifle hunting for goats. So why make it so much harder on yourself? Well, first of all, I will say that, and this is one of the two points of tonight's talk that hopefully I really convey, that I want people to remember, is I really don't think it's as hard as people might perceive it to be. Um, Goats have a lot higher tolerance of people, in my experience, than particularly than sheep. I think that's probably because most places where there are goats, predation is not a major factor. If those of you who've read Beasts of the Color Winter, there's a whole lot of time in that book dedicated to the fact that goats really don't have a lot of natural predators in most environments. There's a few places where that's not true, but I think that they just evolved differently. They've evolved to, the weather and the landscape is a limitation on their population, and they're pretty darn tough, and not a lot messes with these guys. Even where I hunt, where there's a lot of bears around, it's not that common for them to get eaten. So I think that's part of it. They're just not quite as jumpy until you get to these archery ranges. And I feel like then once you're kind of in that sub 50, especially sub 30 yard range, it's a lot different, and they start to act like any other animal when they're pressed. But it's really not as hard as people think it is. They also live in places where it's like, the terrain allows you to get pretty close a lot of the time. Um, but the big thing is it's just super fun. It's super fun to be close to goats. It's super fun to be out there all that time. And I just think I think it just brings a lot more enjoyment and challenge to the experience. It's worth a try. Most of my hunts are by myself. This one's with my wife. Again, this is Kodiak. But goat hunting takes you to places that are just spectacular. I mean, those people in here have had the privilege to hunt goats or sheep. Just know that I think that 95% of the draw is just the places it takes you. It's just so fun being out there. I just love. If I could pick one thing I do for the rest of my life, it would just be wander around in sheep or goat country with my backpack every day. I just love it. And the longer you're out there, the better. And bow hunting takes longer. um, and then you get these encounters, and I feel like about every goat hunt, I'll have one or two encounters. I'll start this little video here, but you get these close encounters. Like this is a nanny, but a lot of people recognize that right away. Um, and if you didn't, check out the Rocky Mountain Goat Alliance's gender identity education information, because we will help you learn why that is obviously a nanny. But I'd actually put an arrow through a billy earlier, and I was waiting. You can actually see him in the background up there in the upper right.
Oh no, it works. There we go.
Uh, just a reminder to mute everybody's phones. Thank you. And while I was waiting, this huge nursery herd wandered by me. This video is actually about 8 minutes long before I edited it closer. And this nanny spent about 8 minutes just kind of within. This is an iPhone video, so she's like 10 to 15 yards. She first popped up at like 5 yards, and she was stomping and waving her head around, and it was just, I mean, it was honestly, it's more memorable to me than killing the goat that I got. It was just super cool. And um, while you can certainly get these experiences hunting it with any other weapon, I feel like it's a little more likely when you're just moving super slow and sitting around a lot and being cautious to have them when you're bow hunting. Takes you to some places you wouldn't end up otherwise. That's just another reminder that this is actually not that far from my house. It's probably like 10 miles as the crow flies. And I would never have gone camping there. The weather was unfortunately horrible during this particular hunt. I had to get with my wife and during my idea for how we'd spend our vacation. But we got close to goats. We definitely got really close to rifle range multiple times, but we were bow hunting, and so didn't bring one home, but just had a super cool experience tromping around the glacier for a while. There she is on another hunt. I think I've now shown you pictures of every hunt I've done with her in the mountains. So the second message that I really want to convey about in this presentation, is the second take home, is bow hunting as a conservation tool. This isn't something you hear talked about a lot in my experience, and I really want everyone to think about this. So if you're following the Goat Alliance, or you're talking to your local biologist, or you're just paying attention to goat populations, you're probably aware that in most places where there's mountain goats, the populations are in decline. Some places in pretty significant decline. And well, I'm not saying that's because of over harvest. I'm definitely not saying that. I think there's a lot of other factors that we dedicated other seminars and discussions to. It does affect hunting opportunity. And we've seen in places, especially where we've seen this with sheep hunting and a little bit in Alaska, that if you make it harder, decrease the success rate, essentially, that can potentially boost opportunity for people to be out there in the landscape. And I think most people that are out goat hunting, they're really out there for the experience. And that's my bias probably. But I think my my kind of bias, and this isn't an official RMGA position, this is my position, is that archery hunting or other limited weapon hunts potentially allow for more opportunity for going hunting. More people get to go out there, but there's less impact on the actual population or the actual resource. And I think in goats, this is particularly important because unlike with sheep, where it's fairly, relatively speaking, easy to regulate hunting toward the most mature, the oldest animals on the landscape, it's harder with goats. And there's mixed success in targeting billies. We know that the nanny harvest has been unacceptably high here in Alaska most of the last decade, which often shuts down a lot of the registration hunts or limited entry hunts, and then has an implication for the following season, how many permits will be given on draw hunts, and potentially could lead to losing over-the-counter hunts or registration hunts, because we know when we shoot nannies, we have a much bigger impact on the population. If we decrease the overall harvest, I think that's a good thing, potentially, by making it a little bit harder, while increasing people's opportunity to actually get out there. And so I think bow hunting is a great way to do that. I would also add that, as I'll get into, one of the main kind of parts of archery hunting for goats and sheep is that you spend a ton of time watching them, trying to figure out when and where you can make your stock. And that gives you a lot of time to identify the animal that you think is the most responsible one to take. And I think most of us probably want the most mature, the oldest billy on the landscape. And I understand there's a few places where there's exceptions, part of Kodiak being one of those places where nanny harvest is encouraged. But most places, shooting an older billy is better overall for the population. And most of us want to do that. And I think, you know, for me, I'm oftentimes watching a goat or a sheep for several days before I make an approach. And I think that increases the odds of getting that kind of more mature kind of target animal. Um, uh, and so, this is what you want to, I guess I put this in here because this is what you want to see when you're out there. You want to see a healthy nursery herd. I'd actually killed a billy. I was shuttling the meat through this nasty spot here, and I'd left the game bags full of meat to come back, or like half the goat to come back. And I came back, and this nursery herd kind of appeared out of nowhere and was 50 yards from where I'd left the goat. And I don't know. I just find these kind of experiences incredible. I just sat there for as long as they would let me. And so anyway, I think the other point I wanted to make here that I made notes to myself is that, again, this is my opinion only, but I think in a lot of ways, hunting has gotten easier in the last couple of decades. And I'm not just talking about the more ready availability of long range shooting lessons and guns and things like that, but probably more than anything, information, the internet, in places, it's just a lot easier to figure out how to do it, where to do it, when to do it. And I think that it's okay. uh, Especially, I don't think there's a ton of people out there that are relying on goats every year to feed their family. I think it's okay to make it a little bit harder. And I think that's, archery is a conservation tool. It's the last I'm going to say about this, but I think bow hunting as a conservation tool to be implemented in certain situations makes sense to me. So let's talk about the fun stuff. So tactics. I'll start by saying that I'm sure this doesn't apply to everywhere where people hunt goats. These are things that have worked for me here in Alaska for goats, a little bit of bleed over from some of my sheep hunting experience. But this is my take on, my approach or my tactics for getting basically sub 20 yards of mature billies in the mountains. So the biggest part of it is observation. You just spend a lot of time watching. I think hunters are, we spend a lot of time watching animals, and when you're bow hunting mountain animals, that's like tenfold. They're not, once you've located an area where there's active movement of sheep or goats in this case, then you sit in a place where you're not going to scare them, and you watch. And for me, that's usually days and days. And I really enjoy this part of the hunt. It's honestly my favorite part of the whole hunt. I get to just watch these animals. This is a mature billy that I did end up arrowing actually in that spot, from the kind of like looker's left, um, that little looker's left ridge. It was a very close shot. And it was a pretty dicey place to get to. I did the whole thing where you like sling your bowstring over your shoulder and climb with both hands. And it's definitely questioning my judgment on that one a little bit, but that was before I had kids. So anyway, um, you said you watch a lot. My mantra that I repeat to myself is don't just do something, sit there. I remind myself of that constantly when I'm out hunting. If I don't have a clear, obvious thing that I know that I feel has a pretty high success rate of getting me close, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to risk bumping them into escape terrain, because we all know that sheep and goats, their primary defense tactic is to go to impossible places, places only they can get to. And I've done a lot of rock climbing, ice climbing in my life, and there's still places that you guys go that I don't want to go. Not to mention, if you can, trying to recover them or deal with the calamity of them falling from those places prohibits it. So you want to get them in places that they're naturally hanging out in, which usually aren't the gnarliest spots in the mountain. So you got to watch. In my experience, you just watch and watch and watch, and sometimes they'll fall into a pattern where you'll feel a certain goat or sheep will move into, they'll kind of move down to feed or do something each day, and sometimes you can capitalize on that. So just watch. I think that's the biggest take home on tactics. The other thing that I'm a big fan of, and this is kind of cliche now in the mountain hunting world, but is having my camp on my back. It's pretty rare for me to start hiking in the morning without all my stuff back in my pack. I very rarely leave my tent and sleeping bag and don't take it with me. I think part of that is because of the bow hunting, is just that, because I'm trying to get so close. I've spent nights 300 yards from target animals, bivvying someplace or just kind of hanging out, where if I was to retreat, I would expose myself, or it was such hard fought gains that I didn't want to give it up. And so having your camp on your back can be strategically really nice, because you can just sleep wherever. You're watching the goats all day and they don't go where you want them to. Instead of hiking back to camp and starting over again, you find a place behind a rock or something and you pull out your sleeping bag. Secondly, especially as someone hunting by myself most of the time, it increases my safety significantly. If I were to fall, even just something minor like hurt my ankle or something, having all my food and stove and sleeping bag and tent and everything on me at that time, I think increases my margin of safety significantly. So that's kind of an important part of my strategy. I prefer shorter length bows that I'll usually strap on my back like that. And then you end up in these kind of situations I mentioned before, like this classic example. There were a couple billies on this ridge. I had seen them from afar. I moved up into the area and the fog just completely came in and choked out the area. And you can tell by that, looking at that ground, it's not a particularly quiet place to walk around. There's a lot of rock shifting and stuff. And I actually spooked a billy at really close range, like about 50 yards from where this picture is taken. And I was like, holy crap, I need to stop moving or I'm going to scare every goat off this ridge. And so I actually found this, it was kind of funny. There was just that whole little thing was just full of goat poop, like goats have been sleeping there. So I just pawed that stuff out of the way and made it my bed for the night. And actually arrowed a goat the next morning. So there you go. It worked. Um, uh, I'm not going to belabor this point, and there may be some questions about this, but light gear is really nice for this kind of style of hunting. This is not going to be a gear talk at all, but I do, as much as I like old wooden bows, and I used to use old wooden arrows, as I'll talk about. I do like lightweight tents and sleeping bags and stuff like that. I think it increases the safety a little bit by being able to carry it with me. And also, I'm 45. I'm already noticing that compared to when I was 35, an extra 5 or 10 pounds in the pack, it makes a little difference on a week or 2 week long hunt. And so I stick to light gear. So terrain is obviously a huge part of goat hunting. Uh, it I think it really is an advantage more times than it's a detriment for a bow hunter. I mean, obviously, if I was rifle hunting the goat that you can probably see in that picture, there he is. There he is. You can tell he sees me. You'd be shooting him with a rifle right now, but you can see that there's, potentially a pretty decent approach on him, depending on where he goes and what he does from there. Provided he does not staring at you like He is here. But the terrain is often very conducive to getting close to these guys. And I think a lot about, I spend a lot of time thinking about where I can safely get for ambushes or where I can get on a bedded goat. This picture I just put in here because I get excited about this kind of terrain. You have to be careful with prevailing winds. A lot of times the goats are where they are because the wind is blowing, to them from the places you could approach. But you can see a lot of goats in that photo. This is on Kodiak. It's mostly nannies and kids there. But that terrain just makes me so excited. There's just so many little ridges and ribs and places to move in and out of there. And most of it's not death defying. And so, I'd give myself pretty decent. If there was one goat, not 50 on that slope, I'd give myself pretty good odds of being able to get bow range. Decoys, I've played with it a little bit. This is again iPhone video. Those goats are like 50 yards away. I'll show you a picture of it in a second. I'm holding up a goat decoy that's strapped to my bow. I've This is the only hunt I ever brought one on. I know people have a lot of success with them. I think that's probably more of a thing if you're hunting with a compound bow and you can shoot 50 yards. I kind of think that likelihood of me really being able to have them be comfortable at 20 yards with this is low, but there it is. I just took that picture a minute ago in my living room. Um, but it's a cool thing. It's fun to play with. I haven't found it super successful. Goats and sheep bust you a lot when you're picking up over a ridge, and I thought that might be a cool tool for that, but I don't think I just don't think it's quite right for that, and I haven't used it as much. And when I have gotten pretty close, they haven't seemed super calm. So, um, good shots and bad spots. This is that goat that was in that spotting scope photo. It's actually a pretty old Billy, not a particularly big Billy, but fairly old. And I did not know he was gonna tumble from there to there, um, but he sure did. And you can see that I was. I don't remember taking this picture. This is like, I don't know, 2016 or 2017, but I was not real pleased with my decision making. I don't care much about trophies. I don't usually bring the hide out anyway, but usually not because I don't want it, but usually because I'm just too far away to deal with it by myself. The extra 30 or 40 pounds, which I'll talk about. But I was pretty bummed about that goat taking. That's the only goat I've had ever take like a really nasty fall. The meat was all fine. I recovered all the meat and didn't really lose any on this one, but it's just definitely something to think about. I think obviously with rifle hunting as well, it's a big deal. And maybe even my bias might be a little lower likelihood of having this happen with the bow, but because I think they often like run someplace and bed down versus just like get knocked over wherever they're standing. But I'm not sure that's true. So let's talk about goat anatomy, particularly as it pertains to where you want to shoot one. I took this picture about 25 yards away from this Billy. He was a younger Billy, and so I did not shoot narrow, but I drew that line to illustrate, and I think this is, in my opinion, and I've read this elsewhere, goats have a different body shape than just about any other animal in North America. Maybe muskox, who are actually fairly closely related to goats, would fall in the same category. But they have a lot of body, a lot of neck and mass in front of the shoulder. And that also means that they have, and I'm just making sure, I'm going to get to a picture in a minute, but just something to think about as I come through these slides is just like look at the kind of where that line is, and then think about, if you drew that line on a deer or an elk, you're not having nearly as much shoulder and chest. That line probably cuts through some ribs, like at least second or third rib. So keep that picture in mind as I go through these. The other big thing, this is actually, I did pack out one goat. It was in a fairly conducive place on the bone. And I weighed the bones, and the bones, once boned out, there was 25 pounds of bone weight. I think this was a 5-year-old Billy. And they, in my experience, I haven't shot one older than that personally, but I have some friends that have, and the bodies of the 8 and 10-year-old Billies, even though the horns weren't like that much bigger, the bodies were significantly bigger. But I put this here to illustrate that the bones are heavy and they're thick. These are really durable animals that are designed to take a hit. And so when we're talking about archery equipment, we're talking about lethality, terminal ballistic performance, you're dealing with a heavy boned animal here in the mountains. I think a lot of people are probably very aware of that, but I wanted just to point that out. Uh, Going back to the anatomy, sorry for the kind of gross pictures, and I apologize. Every picture in here is a picture I've taken myself, and so qualities, I apologize, it's not high enough for some. But this is just to illustrate. I should have drawn a line, but you can see as you go from right to left, the neck obviously is toward the left, how much the rib cage tapers down toward the front, and how small that, and this is a fairly good sized goat, how small the target really starts to be at toward the front, kind of where the heart is. I ended up taking the heart with me, but you can see the heart in that picture. It actually anatomically sits quite a bit lower than that, as I'll show in a second. But there you go. So I edited this photo a little bit. This is a photo from RMGA. You can tell it's a pretty young goat, or maybe just a goat in an early hide. I don't think it's particularly large, Billy, though. But you can see, if you look at, kind of zoom away and look back at this picture, look at where the heart is relative to like center mass of the animal and relative to the front of the animal. And it's kind of right there behind where a lot of that heavy muscle is and where that bulge is. That I think most of us who grew up hunting or hunt, I mean, my dad always told me you shoot behind the shoulders. You don't want to waste meat. It's the classic kind of meat saver spot, whether you're shooting a bow or a rifle. Um, and I can tell you from a lot of experience personally with taking some people out rifle hunting, my personal experience with archery equipment, and just talking to guides and buddies that shoot a lot of goats, that it's very common to think you've made a good shot on a goat and it ends up being a gut shot, or you got a little bit of one lung depending on the angle. And what I wanted to illustrate here with the pink line is, I don't count on there being lung even out to that pink line. And I think that black line kind of represents kind of where some of the bulge kind of looks like it is on a goat sometimes, just because the way their hair is, especially later season. And so you really need to get further forward, in my opinion. It's easy to gut shoot a goat. It's easy to think you made a great shot and gut shoot a goat. And I think this is extra important with archery equipment, but it's important with any weapon you're using. So keep that in mind, and think about it a lot. I think this is another reason why quartering away shots are highly desirable on goats. Um, and also keep in mind that, just like people, when an animal inhales or exhales, depending on where he is in that cycle of inhalation exhalation, when your projectile meets hide, the lung may or may not be there. And so like, what I'm getting at is, when he inhales, it's going to be significantly more to the left and posterior, and when he exhales, it's going to be quite a bit further forward. And so I think if you happen to hit a goat when his lungs are empty, essentially getting ready to take a breath, your target's pretty darn small and pretty darn forward. And so aiming for that, a little further forward, and I'll get into why I use the arrows and broadheads that I do, but I think that's an important thing to consider. The anatomy is very unique, especially for those of us used to shooting deer, elk, in my case, a lot of moose and caribou and blacktails. It's very different. And I've made the mistake myself, and hopefully maybe somebody out there listening to this will be less likely to. um, so this is just to illustrate, quartering away shot angle. This is slightly quartering away. Again, young Billy, just really tempting me to shoot him. um, but I would consider that a pretty decent shot angle. You gotta be careful on that one, depending on what the goats around him are doing. But I think in this, like, I would take that shot for sure at that range. But that quartering away, you're much more likely to get into that pocket without hitting that heavy bone. So let's talk about equipment a little bit. So you could see here, this is goat blood. That's a lung hit on a mountain goat. That's real frothy blood. That's a 250 grain single bevel broadhead on a shooting pretty heavy arrows, not hunt. I would say like 650 to 700 grain arrow. And I was shooting a lighter bow then. I was kind of dealing with a little shoulder thing, so maybe like 50-pound recurve. But in that, broadhead sharpened to, so it's popping hair off my arm, razor sharp. But I think that's a pretty good setup for goats. And I think that particularly in the context of that heavy bone and the fact that you're kind of flirting with those big muscle groups in that bone. My bias is for either, a really well constructed double blade or a thoughtful and well constructed single blade solid broadhead. I've heard stories about mechanical broadheads getting tangled up in the hair. My friend, who's Cole Kramer, who's probably one of the most successful guides when it comes to archery goat hunts maybe out there ever, he is very opposed to mechanical broadheads. I think he's had a few people that bring them, but he does not like it. And I think it's for so many reasons. I think mechanical heads, I get that they're better at long range shots and people anticipate shooting longer range in the mountains, but I'm here to say you don't have to shoot long. It's not that hard to get close. And two, I build my equipment for worst case scenarios, hitting the bone, having the animal turn, or just, making a bad shot. And I want that arrow to have the best possible terminal performance. And so that's why I'm shooting that kind of stuff. This is an example of another broadhead setup I've used. This is the Valkyrie system. I am not sponsored or affiliated in any way. I have no conflict of interest here, but I think that that Valkyrie Jaeger head is a nice shape, and I've put it through goats, I put it through sheep, and I've put it through moose and have it stick in the ground the other side. I don't know if you get quite as good of blood trails with them, but they penetrate well and they're very effective. Uh, so anyway, for what it's worth, I also like the other thing in this picture. You can tell it's like kind of a micro diameter, a 0.166 or 0.165 internal diameter shaft. Um, I I used to shoot wood arrows. I love wood arrows. I love making wood arrows. I love the smell of wood arrows. I do not like what happens to wood arrows when you're in Kodiak for 7 days and it's raining every day. So I stopped using them when I started hunting Kodiak a lot, and I pretty much haven't used them since, for better or worse. But these skinny shafts also a side effect. They're good in the wind. I use tiny, like 4 by 2 inch fletch, which I think also does really well in the wind and also seems to be less impacted by wind and wet conditions. And so that's been a good setup for me. And that's pretty much what I use for all species now. Anywhere from like 530 to I've gone as crazy as like 750 grains, which I called moose styles. Built them up just for moose. But unless I was planning on going, I was leaving for a moose hunt like a couple days after I got back from this goat hunt. So I was using the same setup. Actually, I switched to a longbow, but I kept the same heavy arrow. But anyway, I like that setup a lot. I think it's an effective way to go. And I've had pretty darn good luck with this head and arrow combination. This is not a goat, but this is I just put this in here to illustrate the power of relatively not that powerful. This is a 60-pound longbow. This is a mature, a fairly large bull caribou. This is this past September. 25-yard shot on a large bull caribou, quartering away. Was really surprised that I didn't have a pass through. I'm a very strong advocate for having your setup always have a pass through. Anytime I have not a pass through on any big game animal, I do a complete re-examination of everything in my setup, because I feel like every single shot you make with a bow should make 2 holes in the animal. There's just no excuse unless you hit heavy bone for not having an exit wound, in my opinion. I think that increases recovery rates and increases blood trails. This one, I didn't have a pass through. I was like, what happened? Like, it was a perfect shot until I started manipulating the caribou when I picked it up, and I realized his offside front leg was just a floppy mess. This is what I found. This is, essentially like a comminuted fracture. This is just broken to pieces. That's the shoulder bone, scapula there. And this is the heaviest bone on a caribou, essentially, besides maybe the equivalent bone on the back leg. It's the human equivalent of a humerus. Um, and it just shattered it, and that caribou went down. I'm not sure it would happen that would do this on a goat. I've never actually shot into green bone on a goat like that, but that bow is only shooting about 165, 170 feet per second, and that's only a 530 grain arrow. So I think the right arrow and broadhead can be incredibly effective. There's my bow of choice. Again, no affiliation with any brand, but that's my typical setup if I'm sheep and goat hunting, and pretty much now just hunting for anything. Sometimes I make the arrows prettier. Didn't have much time that year, but that's it. Simple longbow, the 2-piece bow, folds up quick. I can shove it in my pack. If I'm hunting with a recurve, which I haven't done in probably 5 or 6 years, 3-piece, I can take it apart quick, shove it in my pack, keep it safe for the bushwhack or whatever. I think it's a really great weapon. The other plug I'll just make for traditional bows is that as far as failure of a weapon in the field, I feel like there's nothing more robust and durable. Like, I've literally thrown them in the rocks not on purpose, but when I've like fallen, I've chucked them into the rocks. I've, other than cutting some strings, which carry an extra one in my hip pocket, and I've replaced it while on a stock before in about, I don't know, 1 minute. It's a very robust setup. You know, you're not, you drop your rifle and mess up your scope. Might not have a great hunt. Cut your string on a compound, you're probably going home. These bows are very resilient. Just plug for traditional archery equipment. Um, so talk about this quickly. The pack out. am not a. I've used pretty much every brand of backpack, load carrying backpack out there. You can see this one actually failed, since their designs are a little better, and I've had better luck. But that is what it looks like when you're packing out a mature goat, all the meat, not the hide, camp, and maybe like a couple days left of food. And let me tell you, it is pretty brutal on a big goat. You're talking, I bet 100 pounds of meat or close to it if you take all of it, and you know, and should. And take, this is like all the ribs and all the inside stuff and the heart. It's 100 pounds honest. It's much bigger than a sheep. And I don't understand how someone could bring out solo all of that and the hide. I've never done it. I've loaded it up before and carried it a few hundred yards, and I've I've weighed packs that I brought out 7 miles of sheep at 142 pounds. This was considerably heavier than that. It was like I was gonna hurt myself. This pack here is definitely in that 140 range, thereabouts. And so it's kind of brutal to do it by yourself. I oftentimes, especially if the terrain is technical at all, will break up the load and shuttle, even though it triples the overall distance. There's that one I was talking about. That's a whole goat, full hide, head in. Could have shaved a little pounds by taking the head out, caping it out, but that was unpleasant. Um, so we're at about 40 minutes. I am happy to take questions. Are there any? See, I'm not seeing any. Not seeing the chat. Are there any questions in the chat, Stacy?
I'm also not seeing any questions in the chat, but at
Um,
this time, people, you are welcome to unmute and just
yeah,
shout them out.
and I do have a bunch of like just story photo. I have a bunch of stories I could tell, but I didn't want to take away from. We know we have limited time here. I didn't want to take away from the opportunity to have other people join the conversation. So I'm happy to tell hunting stories, but also love to have a conversation.
I personally would be very happy to hear some hunting stories. I feel like you have quite a few in your
Oh,
docket.
there's got to be some questions, or somebody. It's got to be somebody who just fervently disagrees with something I said.
I got a question for you.
Yes, Marvin.
Few things. How about the white painter suit for late season?
Oh, glad you mentioned that. So yeah, in the snow, yes. I'm not for. I know people who have had good luck bow hunting with just kind of sitting in the green ground or brown ground and letting goats approach, or stalking in the white suit. I have not had success personally, and I've tried it quite a few times before I gave up. Doing the actual stalk in a white suit in non-snowy conditions. I feel like it probably great at rifle ranges, potentially. I don't honestly think it puts them that much more at ease. I think goats are pretty comfortable with people standing 200 yards away most of the time anyway, or at least comfortable enough to tolerate you setting up to shoot them. But as far as getting into bow range, I haven't had that work super well. But I agree. During the winter time when it's snowy, yeah, I'm wearing white stuff. I wish somebody would create like a much better like system than a Tyvek suit, which is what I usually take because there's nothing else that's light, and simple. But I've had some, definitely in the winter conditions, I'm using that. And during, I have hunted a little bit during the rut in late November. I don't know if I think their eyes are better than that to like come into that personally. I don't know. What's your take?
Yeah, late season. So we got one at 15 yards, a mature 6-year-old that
Yep.
came in right to 15 yards. So
Cool.
we weren't archery, but we got him with the open sight rifle.
Oh,
So
cool.
we
Hey,
did.
actually, yeah.
So
Go ahead.
we were mixing it up and trying some different things. So,
Cool.
but typically I find in November with that suit on,
Mhm.
he came right in. So that's pretty
Yep.
cool. Yeah, 15.
And that's because they're in the rut. They're just looking
Yeah.
to be close to goats, is what you're getting at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're just keen and interested. And if you're looking like a
Yep.
goat, got the color of a goat, they're coming in.
I like that. That's super cool. I have not had that experience, but that's really cool to hear. And that's what I think it's different in different areas, or yeah, that's really interesting. I like it. And I love the open sights idea. That's super cool too.
It's kind of like the full experience of archery hunting with a bang. And I guess this is a question I have, and it's about the retrievals, right? So I mean,
Hmm.
we're in pretty nasty terrain. So
Yeah.
trying to like, and obviously that's where shot placement is critical.
Yep.
So yeah, it's so often it's like you just know they're going to get into that terrain unless you're confident in your shot and can put them down. So if you've been in some, I mean, you talked about the tumbles, but have you been in a situation where or friends or that you've known of that have just couldn't retrieve it? It went right into
Oh
the
yeah.
cliffs and bedded down.
Yep. It happens for sure. Yeah, no doubt about it. It's possible. I typically, if I'm hunting the road system in Kodiak, and I do have a lot of technical climbing experience myself. I have ropes and stuff in the car, some basic anchors and other stuff to do that. And if I'm out hunting by myself, I usually have at least 100 feet of cord that I know has a breaking strength of like 800 to 1,000 pounds that I'm certainly not like treating as a dynamic climbing rope or even a static climbing rope, but I luckily have never had to lower myself into a spot, but I bring that mainly so I could like lower a goat or a sheep out of a nasty spot. I've been lucky that I haven't lost one like that. But I think it's a potential goat hunting no matter what your weapon choice personally. It's also another good plug for that observation point. Just wait till they're in the right place. Like you're out in the most beautiful place in the world. Why? Well, give yourself another day there. Maybe the goat will go to a better spot. Well,
Perfect.
half of it's an excuse for me just to spend more time out there. So there are some questions in the chat.
Yes.
So let's see. Philip said, "Do you do anything to treat your feathers for wetness?" Philip, great question. I've tried a bunch of stuff, the powders and the sprays. I've stopped doing that, honestly. I don't think it helps that much. After a couple days of significantly wet weather, they're going to be pretty wet anyway. I think for me, the most important thing is that the tune of your bow is impeccable. And I think all the archers on here know what I'm talking about. You want your tune to be perfect with your broadheads, and if you get to that point, personally, I don't think it matters that much. I think the feathers will still stabilize enough. I've played with these things called trad vanes, which are like a very soft compound. Plastic vane designed specifically for shooting off the shelf of a traditional bow, and they're fine. They shoot fine out of my bow, but I often don't bother making them up. But that's a solution. See, Lucas asks, do you think muzzleloader with open sights would be as effective as a bow for conservation tool, as you put it? Also, I think that decreased range would improve the billy harvest. I think that's a good point. And when I was just having a conversation about Dall sheep, which are essentially in crisis population wise in Alaska for most of the state right now. I think that's a completely relevant question to ask, and I think that people should be asking that of our board game. If not archery, then what? Unless we want to start restricting access more and more. But I think that's a great question. I'd love to see muzzleloader open sights season. I think that'd be super cool. Trapper asks, during late season hunts, have you had concerns with avalanche hazard and how do you mitigate the hazard? Oh, great question. I love hearing hunters talk about this. Thanks, Trapper. Um, so I've spent a lot of my career as a professional backcountry ski guide. I have done the highest levels of avalanche certification available in North America. And I spend a lot of time considering avalanche hazard in the winter. And I agree that oftentimes it is a factor in late season mountain hunts. We've had some pretty notable tragedies or near tragedies here in Alaska from just that. One not too far from where I'm sitting right now, just 20 miles away in Chugach Range. Some sheep hunters took a pretty big ride and got hurt pretty bad. Um, so it's something to consider for sure. I haven't ever had a high avalanche hazard affect my hunting, but it's definitely something to consider. And I would strongly advocate anyone hunting snowy conditions for sheep and goats to take at least a basic avalanche class to get some basic understanding of it. Great question. Anyone else? Great questions. Well, I can do a few little stories. We have till 6, is that, or I guess 8 your time, is that right? Okay, cool.
Yep.
So I'll just muddle through a few. How many people? Like, I bet there's people that are cringing at the fur around the horns there. It's a pretty hasty job in the middle of a rainstorm, but it makes me cringe now a little bit too because I'm a little more careful than I was then. But I left the hide anyway, so and I don't typically do shoulder mounts. This is that first goat that I got in 2014, 13. That's my setup right there. That's probably only like 4 or 5 days worth, probably 4 days, 5 days worth of food. Got the bear spray there. I have done almost all of my hunting with no firearms on my person. It's just extra weight, and I even on Kodiak and places where there's a lot of bears around, I feel like that's more than adequate. Sometimes I don't even bother to bring that. But that whole other conversation. But I had been working this area, as Marvin was mentioning, hunting them in the rut. These goats were kind of doing some rutty behavior. There was some lone billies cruising these ridges. I had it to myself during that period. And let's see here, was experiencing some pretty adverse weather. I had one night when I spent most of the night like kind of with my back against my tent, trying to hold it up in the wind. Pretty typical Kodiak in November experience. And kind of in the upper right corner where there's just kind of like a little snowy plateau above the black rocks. This billy was cruising around and made my way up there. And when I got up there, he was gone. And then he ended up. This is me. That now I'm on top of the ridge. It's kind of hard to explain exactly where I was there, but this is what the terrain looked like. It would have been like a pretty steep ski run had conditions allowed to get down there, but I was able to carefully work my way down. I was really surprised that he tolerated the noise. I'm a pretty experienced crampon user. I can move pretty effectively with those things without making like excessive noise, but it's still pretty loud and crunchy moving with those things. And I think he thought I was a goat making that noise. And I've found sheep and goats fairly tolerant, much more tolerant of things they hear than the things they see or smell. But wind was my favor. And I think he just sat down there hearing the crunching above it, wondering what was going on. And I got down there and he was like 8 yards away, and I was able to put a good arrow in. And you can see, if you look carefully, you can see the goat in the center that you follow the blood trail. And you can see where he died. Not the best place in the world to deal with a goat. Honestly, this is what it looked like when I got over there. You kind of like it took his final resting place, kind of wedged in this little, uh, wind feature under this rock. And I did kind of had my work cut out for me there. And so what I ended up doing, because there was like a pretty clean snowshoot, a little bit kind of along that blood trail, I was able to chip out a little like ledge to walk across on. Because where he was, I would not have wanted to fall or have had him slide. He would have gotten a pretty rocky ride. And so I was able to get him. If you look up there, I was able to get him in one of those chutes and let him slide, and he slid all the way down on the hard snow. And then it made for like the most pleasant goat butchering experience I've ever had, because he was on flat, cold, clean snow. It was awesome. So very, very high quality meat out of that one. But that was a really cool experience. My first goat, and just a real great memory for me. This one was a little bit.
Paul,
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
there was a follow-up question that was thrown in the chat, and I
Yes.
figured
Oh yeah. What you got?
it was a follow-up to the avalanche discussion, so I figured it's a good segue after all of your snow stories.
do it.
Do you think basic avalanche safety training is enough for hunters, or should they get more tailored training, as it's a different approach versus recreational?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know. Maybe someone out there knows. Speak up if you do, about hunting specific avalanche education. But I think um, you know, becoming a avalanche practitioner is kind of like learning how to do any other lifetime thing. You never master it. I've been doing it for a long time, and I know people have been doing it a lot longer. And every one of us is still like pretty uncertain in our predictions a lot of the time. And so I think that's a really good start, especially for those coming to it with very little, backcountry snow and avalanche experience. I think the Canadian and the American system are very similar now. They used to be different, but they both have like a recreational pathway and then a professional pathway for professional avalanche users. I think that basic Rec 1 class, or the Canadian equivalent, I think it's called AST1, are great. And by the way, the Canadians have, as with many things, have led the Americans in avalanche education. We're catching up. You guys do a great job up there or down there from here. But I'd say start with a basic course, become comfortable with the basic equipment, the beacon, the shovel, and a probe, and then gain experience, ideally with people that have more experience. And I'll this something weird that I like to say, but experience isn't just being out there. Experience is like going out with a kind of a hypothesis of what you think's you're gonna see, and then testing it. That's how you really gain experience, not just I went skiing 100 times and I didn't get an avalanche. I don't necessarily consider that experience to the same degree. So take that for what it's worth. It'd be cool if there was something specific for hunters. But I think starting with that basic class, and then I think hopefully that will help get people to the point where they'll recognize where they're in over your head. I think for most hunters, it's more of the the old saying, the known knowns, the unknown knowns, and then unknown unknowns. I think for hunters, a lot of time it's the unknown unknowns that get them. They just don't know that they don't know. And I think once you have even some basic avalanche education, you'll kind of understand what the hazards are, and then maybe what you don't know about a certain situation. And hopefully that would prompt people to maybe take a step back. The last thing I'll say, I'm just droning on here. Last thing I'll say, one thing to remember, just always when it comes to avalanche stuff, when it comes to hunting, I think where most hunters get in trouble is using routes that are typically very safe and comfortable in the summertime. So the traverse that you feel like you can do with no trouble because you do it all the time, and that's where we get caught, is when we're otherwise comfortable, otherwise very familiar setting, the traverse you've done a million times, the traverse you did when you were scouting and now it's snowy. That's what often gets people. So just remember that it's a different game in the winter in those same places that feel safe. Can maybe not. So put that out there.
You spoke a lot about gaining experience, and which is a perfect, again, segue into the next question that we got. As someone who lives in a state with a limited population and low likelihood of hunting them, what's a good way to get involved in mountain goat conservation and spend some time around them? Like where would you suggest someone starts?
Well, thank you for that question, Lucas. There is an organization called the Rocky Mountain Goat Alliance. Please join us if you're not already and get involved. We love volunteers. We love people to get involved as a regional rep. And I mean, my experience there is I've learned a ton about goats just through my involvement with the RMGA. So big plug for the RMGA. Great opportunity. Depending on where you live, there might be counts where you get to interface with local biologists. You could be a regional rep. That's a great way into the door of your local biologist office. Say, hey, I'm with the Goat Alliance, or I'm a member of the Goat Alliance. I'd love to talk about mountain goats. So I think all those things are awesome. And then, I mean, the beautiful thing about the countries we live in is that these goats are living on public land. And even though we might have to wait a lifetime to draw a tag to actually shoot one, you can go hiking up there every year. You can go hiking up there every year and go spend time around them and watch them and learn about them. And I think that makes you a better hunter. I mean, if you're out there spending, a bunch of time watching goats every year and you finally draw a tag, you've got a huge leg up on the folks who haven't done that. And just like, another plug for bow hunting, if you have 10 days to hunt, most bow hunters are probably going to hunt 8, 9, 10 days, whether they get something or not. If you do that for 10 seasons versus a rifle hunter who might tag out on day 2, 3, 4, 5, over 10 years, you've probably done twice as much hunting. So same thing with observing them. The more time you spend out there, I think the more you gain. So great question. Please join if you haven't already, and get involved. What else? Anybody else in the live questions? Got a couple minutes left. Great questions.
Not seeing any more in the chat.
What a great group with such awesome questions. So this is I'll kind of go. There we go.
We got another one.
Trapper again. All right, Trapper,
yeah.
goat hunter, CAA level 2 practitioner. More curious if there would be enough interest in a tailored training for hunters. Oh, wonderful. So Trapper, you are also, it sounds like you are a very experienced avalanche practitioner with high level of training. That's awesome. So great question. I don't know, maybe, I don't know how to answer that question about the interest in the community. If you're thinking about designing some curriculum, let me know. I can try to help. Yeah, once again, Canada leading with the avalanche education, maybe having the first hunting program. Go Canada. So yeah, get in touch with me. I'm easy to get a hold of. Just Paul at Goat Alliance. That'd be awesome, Trapper. Thanks. Cool,
Awesome.
exciting stuff. That'd be neat to see. One of my friends here has asked too about something like that. So cool conversation. I bet people would be into it. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, it sounds like there's definitely an opening there.
Yeah, I bet, hunters are keen to hear more about, skills and learn stuff. And so I think that could be a really cool opportunity. Very neat.
Awesome.
Well, looks like we're
All
kind
right.
of out of time anyway. Maybe I should
Yeah.
just stop there.
I was gonna say, I think this is a perfect time. I will stop the recording as well.